Hello there! Exclamation point. In the 18th year of our triple, I am interested to know what your thoughts are on achieving the PlayStation 3 frame consistency dream. Running at 480p on a CRT/RetroTink, overclocking, emulation, all of the above. So, John, this is an interesting one, right? Because what the PlayStation 3 does have a particular fascination, right?
Yeah.
It is arguably, actually, I don't think it's arguably, it's probably the least impressive of Sony's particular PlayStation generations, right?
I mean,
Overall,
I would argue that, yeah.
yeah. And performance was a problem pretty much from the beginning of the generation to the end.
Mm-hmm.
I'm enjoying some of the suggestions here. Overclocking. I do want to try overclocking the PlayStation 3 GPU, but I've seen some videos and I'm not sure the results are going to be game-changing as such. Running at 480p, some games did actually scale down their resolution, so they did run smoother. Emulation. Now, you've investigated, I think, pretty much all of these options. So, what would be your thoughts in achieving the PS3 frame consistency dream in the year of our Lord, 2024?
Well, for games that do benefit from running at a lower resolution, then I think CRT is the way to go there. 480p on a CRT VGA monitor looks really good, and it absolutely helps with some games, but not all games, unfortunately. In which case, at that point, there's not that much you can do to improve it further outside of emulation. And emulation is, of course, a little bit finicky still. It's far better than it used to be, but the requirements per game are extremely variable depending on what the game was doing. So it can require some pretty serious hardware to pull it off well. But I think for the future, like looking towards emulation is the only way to really overcome the PS Triple's weaknesses. It doesn't, the problem is it doesn't even benefit that much from, like, if you were to run it, the display type that was common at the time of release for each console is typically how it's best viewed. But with the case of PS3, that's not really the case, right? Like even LCDs, if you bought their plasmas from that era and you wanted to match the common resolution of 1280 by 720, you really couldn't do it because they didn't sell those. They were 1366 by 768. So you always had to deal with some bit of scaling, which looks like garbage. Those technology, back then LCDs especially were awful.
It was pretty much, well, I can imagine you sitting there with your Sony headset with the 720p OLEDs playing PS3 games, but there were also 720p projectors, but that was kind of it. Pretty much, I would say the vast majority of people playing on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, it was the 720p generation, but they were actually experiencing a double-scaled image.
Yeah, which I think was due to overscan considerations, which I thought was silly for a fixed pixel display format in the first place. But yeah, I think DLP rear projection TVs also offered some 1280 by 720 options.
Right.
So, but at least today, if you want to do HD, then the RetroTink is really good for getting a clean 720p to your modern screen with perfect scaling. You can even simulate the pixels, but that doesn't solve the frame consistency. It's just, it is what it is. That's just the PS3.
Yeah, I think there are some screens that have nearest neighbor scaling as well. So 720p would actually go, it's a 3x3 upscale to 4K.
It's great.
But you're quite right, that doesn't solve the fact that...
Of course, Rich, very well that a lot of PS3 games did not hit the coveted 720p number either. So you're already dealing with scaling there, and pretty bad scaling, I would say, which is kind of where the 480p stuff comes in, because that kind of circumvents those problems, because at worst you get super sampling from a resolution that's only a little above 480p, but in general, that's probably the best way to play a PS3 on a widescreen CRT monitor that accepts 480p.
Wow.
You must be kind of a bit bemused by all of that, Will.
Yeah, it's a whole nother world. The PS3 was the first PlayStation console I ever owned, and I was like, "Oh, this is great." I had no idea I had any issues at all.
Man.
Yeah, well, I'm assuming you weren't a regular Eurogamer reader of Digital Foundry content at the time.
No, probably not. I don't think I had that kind of awareness. I was just like, this PC is pretty good. I'll do that.
I think it is pretty much emulation that's going to get you to where you want to go, but it does still seem that even years on, it's kind of like we're starting to approach an era where it's kind of stable emulation-wise, but there's still issues.